Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Now, have you, in your many interviews, encountered people who had a bad experience and were still, years later, disturbed by it?
No, because people worked through them.
Mm-hmm.
People had one way or another of dealing with it. So I didn't find one person who said, I had a bad trip, a terrible trip, and I was harmed by it.
Mm-hmm.
I never heard that. Yeah. I interviewed people who were harmed by the shaman, who were raped by a shaman. That's a different thing.
Mm-hmm.
But from their own inner experience, no.
Yeah.
People say it was very challenging, very difficult, and I learned so much.
Mm-hmm. Now, in the early days of psychedelic use, there were instances of suicide. Art Linkletter, for example, had a child.
That's a misnomer,
yeah.
Actually. I think she had taken acid 6 months before.
Mm-hmm.
It was quite a time before.
Yeah.
And she'd already had a history of psychiatric disturbances, which Linkletter didn't want to talk about.
Uh-huh.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
So, but I read in the original research they were doing in Maryland,
mm-hmm.
where Stan Groff originally had
yes.
the ward where they were using acid with
mm-hmm.
psychiatric inpatients.
Yes.
Of course they had, back then and even in the research protocols these days, they have a male and a female therapist
mm-hmm.
with everyone
mm-hmm.
taking any of the psychedelics.
So that you're never left alone.
You're never alone,
mm-hmm.
and you have the archetype of parents.
You're never alone with a person of the opposite sex.
And
either.
that's also true,
yeah.
or of any sex,
mm-hmm.
either sex, same
mm-hmm.
sex. But the next day, that person was also never left alone,
mm-hmm.
which I think is something that we in this country need to pay more attention
mm-hmm.
to.
In other words, give yourself time after the experience to process.
Right, and if you're not completely together when
mm-hmm.
everybody else is,
yeah.
somebody should stay with you. Now we know this there are harm reduction tents at
music festivals,
yeah. and Burning Man,
yeah.
and the number one rule is, I will stay with you until you're totally okay. I will not leave you. There will always be somebody with you. If I have to
mm-hmm.
take a break, you're never going to be alone.
Mm-hmm.
So it's this enormous reassurance. In ayahuasca ceremonies, we have to be more sensitive to this.
Mm-hmm.
We have to be sure that nobody wanders off alone, that even after the ceremony is pretty much over, everybody, as one person put it, everybody's wheels are back on the runway. Everybody's
mm-hmm.
together.
Mm-hmm.
So the opposite story is someone had carpooled to an ayahuasca ceremony,
yeah.
carpooled back home. His friends dropped him off. He went in the house, and he called a taxi to take him to the ER. He was having a full-blown panic attack.
Mm-hmm.
And there was not the structure in the ceremony for someone to say, are you really okay? Are you ready to be alone? And someone to really stay with him. And I
mm-hmm.
think we have to do better, taking
yeah.
care of each other. We have to build it into the system.
I see. Well, that's a very good lesson.
Yeah.
That's a very good lesson, and I trust that our viewers who are considering this experience will keep that in mind.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Please. Safety is always a priority.
Mm-hmm.
Set and setting.
Mm-hmm.
We want the setting to be very safe.